After the show, when the crowd was gone and the floor still smelled of warm cables and old smoke, Phil Collins slid down a concrete wall and sat on the ground like a boy who had finally run out of strength. His shirt was damp. His hands were red from playing. Somewhere down the corridor, someone was laughing too loudly, trying to keep the magic alive for a few more minutes. But Phil was not inside that noise anymore. He was behind it. He was sitting in the shadow after the applause, staring at the polished floor, hearing the echo of thousands of people who loved him, and feeling strangely, painfully alone. Then he heard a woman's voice say his name. Not Phil, not Mr. Collins, not the voice of a manager, promoter, journalist, or fan. She said, "Philip?" And that one word reached him faster than any spotlight ever had. It was his mother, June, older now, quieter now, but still carrying the same look she had when he was a small boy in London, tapping on tables, tapping on chairs, tapping on anything that would make a sound. She had seen him before Genesis, before Peter Gabriel left, before Face Value turned private pain into public music, before America sang along to heartbreak it did not fully understand. To the world, he was becoming a phenomenon. To her, he was still the child who could never sit still because rhythm had already found him. She did not rush toward him with excitement. She did not ask about the crowd. She did not talk about record sales. She simply knelt beside him, one hand against the wall for balance, and looked at his face the way only a mother can look at a face. Not to admire it, not to judge it, to search it. Phil tried to smile. That was his habit. Smile first, make a joke, keep the room comfortable, carry the beat for everyone else. But that night, the smile did not hold. Because by the early 1980s, Phil Collins had learned a terrible truth. You could be adored by millions and still feel like you had failed the people closest to you. You could fill a stadium and still miss the one room you wanted most. You could sing about pain so honestly that strangers felt healed, while the people at home wondered whether fame had taken too much from the man they loved. June saw all of that before he said a word. She sat beside him on the floor in her dark coat, in the cold gray backstage light, with a paper cup of tea cooling nearby. It was not glamorous. It was not the kind of moment that appears on a poster. It was the kind of moment that happens after the photograph, after the performance, after everyone else has gone looking for the star. And then, softly, she said the line Phil would hear again and again in the private rooms of his life. A mother can hear the child inside the applause. He looked away when she said it, not because it was sentimental, because it was true. For years, Phil had been moving too fast to be seen clearly. Genesis had changed around him. The drummer had stepped forward when nobody knew if the band could survive without Peter Gabriel. The man at the back of the stage had become the man at the microphone. Then came the separation, the empty house, the drum machine clicking in lonely rooms, the strange miracle of Face Value. People heard power in those songs, but June heard something else. She heard a son trying not to disappear, and that night backstage, on what should have been another triumph, she had not come to praise the superstar. She had come to find out whether Philip was still in there. What the fans did not know was that Phil's success had arrived with a bill attached to it. From the outside, it looked like the great escape. Genesis was no longer just surviving, it was growing. Phil's solo career had exploded in a way few people could have predicted. In the Air Tonight was not just a song, it was a confession that somehow became a global signal. The drum break sounded like a door being kicked open after years of silence. Audiences waited for it. They leaned toward it. They wanted the moment when Phil's private wound became thunder. But there is a cost when your wound becomes the thing people cheer for. Phil knew how to work. That was never the problem. He could rehearse until the room emptied. He could record one more take, fly one more city, smile through one more interview, and answer one more question about whether the songs were really about his marriage. He could be funny when he was exhausted. He could be generous when he was hurting. He could turn a collapsing life into melody, rhythm, and discipline. But when he went back to the hotel room, the sound changed. There were no crowds there, no lights, no roar. Just the small mechanical hum of the room and the strange feeling that life was happening somewhere else without him. His children were growing. His family story was changing. The home he had wanted to protect had become a place he could only visit in memories, phone calls, and guilty silences. June understood more than he wanted her to. She had spent years near the entertainment world. She knew that applause could be kind, but it could also be greedy. It asks for one more song, one more tour, one more version of the face everyone recognizes. It does not always ask whether the person behind that face has eaten, slept, forgiven himself, or called home. One afternoon during those restless years, Phil stopped at his mother's home between commitments. He came in without ceremony, carrying the tiredness of airplanes and rehearsal rooms. He had the look of a man who had been clapped for all week, but not comforted once. On the table, June had placed a simple meal, nothing dramatic, nothing staged, just something warm, waiting. Phil sat down and began talking too quickly, about schedules, about Genesis, about the strange pressure of being both the drummer and the singer, both the reliable one and the wounded one, both the man who had to keep time and the man who was losing it. He talked about America. He talked about interviews. He talked about how people thought the songs explained everything. June listened. Then she interrupted him with the gentleness of someone who was not afraid of his fame. "Philip, when do you stop performing?" He almost laughed because it sounded simple, too simple. That was the kind of question only a mother could ask. Not because she misunderstood the business, but because she understood the person. She was not asking when the tour ended. She was asking when he allowed himself to be tired, when he allowed himself to be angry, when he allowed himself to be a father who missed things, a husband who had failed in ways he could not repair, a son who did not always know how to come home. For a moment he had no answer. The room became very quiet. There was a piano in another room, not the arena piano, not the studio instrument surrounded by engineers and expectations, just a family instrument, touched by ordinary hands, silent in the afternoon light. Phil walked to it and pressed a few chords. They were not polished. They were not for a record. They sounded unfinished, like a thought he did not know how to finish. June stood in the doorway. She did not ask him to play something famous. She did not ask for a song the public knew. She listened to the spaces between the notes, and that may have been the strange mercy of having a mother in a life like Phil Collins had built. She did not need the hit. She did not need the drum break. She did not need the proof. She could hear the child inside the applause. But Phil was still running, and the faster he ran, the more complicated love became. He loved his children, but the work pulled him away. He loved the music, but the music demanded almost everything. He loved the stage, but the stage rewarded him for turning pain into entertainment. Somewhere inside him was a boy who had once wanted to make people smile by keeping the beat. Now he was a man whose saddest moments had become part of the world's soundtrack. That was the turning point June feared. Not that he would fail, that he would succeed so completely that no one would notice what success was doing to him. Years later, when people looked back on Phil Collins, they often argued about the obvious things. Was he the drummer who became a singer? Was he the frontman who carried Genesis into a new era? Was he the pop star whose songs seemed to follow people through marriage, divorce, radio drives, lonely kitchens, and late-night memories? Was he too successful? Too exposed? Too easy to misunderstand? But June's view of him was older than all of that. She had known the boy before the debates, before the critics, before the great machine of fame decided when he was beloved and when he was unfashionable. A mother remembers the beginning. She remembers the small hands, the nervous energy, the dreams that looked impossible before they became exhausting. She remembers the child before the world renames him. That is why the backstage moments stayed with him. Not because anything dramatic happened afterward. No grand speech, no sudden healing. Phil did not stand up from that floor and become a simpler man. Life did not become neat. The tours continued. The records continued. The pressure continued. So did the old ache between ambition and home, between public love and private absence, between the roar of the crowd and the quiet question waiting in every empty room. But something had been named. June had reminded him that underneath the work, underneath the applause, underneath the drum fills and the interviews and the jokes he used to protect himself, there was still a son, a boy, a human being. Not a machine made for rhythm, not a voice designed to explain heartbreak for strangers. Just Philip, tired against a wall, needing someone to see him without asking for anything. That is the part of Phil Collins' story that can be easy to miss. His music often sounds huge now. It fills supermarkets, cars, arenas, headphones, old memories, and new heartbreaks. In the Air Tonight still arrives like weather. Against All Odds still sounds like a man standing at the edge of a goodbye he cannot accept. Genesis songs still carry that strange mixture of precision and feeling, as if the band was building something strong enough to hold things that were falling apart. But behind the size of the music was a smaller truth. A mother had watched her son become famous enough for the world to shout his name. And still, when she found him at his lowest, she used the name only she could make sound like home. Philip. Maybe that is why Mother's Day stories cut so deeply. They are not only about flowers, cards, and warm memories. They are about the people who knew us before our armor. The people who can tell when our smile is working too hard. The people who can hear our fear inside our success. For Phil Collins, June was not a footnote to the legend. She was part of the quiet foundation beneath it. She was there before the stadiums, before the heartbreak became a record. Before the drummer stepped to the microphone and discovered that singing could expose him even more than drumming ever had. And perhaps, in the moments when the applause became too loud, he could still hear her voice cutting through it. A mother can hear the child inside the applause. That line does not make fame disappear. It does not repair every marriage, recover every missed day, or erase every lonely hotel room. But it tells the truth about what love sometimes does. Love recognizes us when the world is distracted by what we have become. So when you hear Phil Collins now, do not only hear the superstar. Listen for the sun. Listen for the boy tapping out rhythms before anyone knew where they would take him. Listen for the man who gave the world a beat, while one woman kept listening for his heart. Because behind every loud song, there may be a quiet mother saying, "I still know who you are." And sometimes that is the only applause that can save a person. If stories like this remind you why this music still matters, subscribe for more untold stories from the legends who gave everything to the music.